Monday afternoon. Those are included in our packets, and so we will not be taking questions or comments from the audience at this meeting. For people who are not yet aware, seated on the outside of this table is Steve Sullivan, who is the, what exactly is your title?
I'm the Deputy Director of the Property Tax Division, Maine Revenue Service.
Did you all hear that? I've been told.
I am the Deputy Director for the Property Tax Division of Maine Revenue Services.
And we have also with us our town attorney, Mark Bauer, who is here also to help us through the questions of taxation, contracts, and all things that have been up in the air. Specifically, Mark was invited because after we had an opinion letter from our town attorneys that said that the contract was met, there was vociferous objection from members of the public and some from the board, and it was decided that in-person consultation would be effective. And then Steve was invited to be here as well because he apparently knows something about property tax law. So I have one question that's come up since then, and Mark, I would like if you would speak to this after this workshop at some later date.
Oh.
But it's because of the number of emails that have flown back and forth and the number of conversations that I'm aware of that have taken place outside of the public. Could you offer some kind of opinion as to and clarity about ex parte communications and whether or not it is appropriate for a member of the board to speak privately to a member of the public about an abatement question?
You want that opinion at a later date?
Yeah, a later date.
Okay.
Because we didn't get that submitted.
Is that regarding a pending abatement request of the Board of Assessors?
Pending abatement request. And just generally, any other public business that may or may not come up.
Yeah, as you might imagine, there is a difference between whether there's a pending adjudication before the board or not. So that is an important fact to keep in mind. So I can certainly provide you with some guidance on that.
Right. And how many emails back and forth between people would constitute a public meeting?
Again, for the future,
future
opinion. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Can I ask a question about this? Is it meeting emails between the public as a meeting or us as a meeting?
Either or, both. Yeah.
You're talking about emails between the Board of Assessor members
Or
outside of the meeting?
the general public? Is there
Between members of the board and the general public discussing public business.
Okay.
When the entire public is not privy to these emails.
Okay. So you don't want me to get into this now?
No, we've got enough to deal
All right.
with tonight.
Okay.
One of the essential questions has been what materials is the town entitled to, and what actually do we have in the office as information? And take it away, please.
Your first specific question is what information
What
are you entitled to?
information the town is entitled to, and then I would like to ask Christine whether or not the town actually has that information to her knowledge.
Okay. Well, I guess, the first place that I would look would be the agreement, and sort of what the agreement, again, I was just talking to Steve about this. is there a date on this agreement that was signed?
The last page. Or the second to last page, I believe. There's, oh, there's not. There's not. Because it was April 30th, 2021 when it was received.
Just
Cover letter.
recollecting when that was signed.
Right, this was the bid response, their response to the bid, but then the actual contract came later, I assume,
Yes.
quite a bit later, no? I just was wondering, because Steve was mentioning there was a change in the rule at some point, I just was curious whether that played into it all, just, like, Christine, do you know what date the contract was signed on? It's not dated, so,
I can look back at the office and see
okay,
if there's an agreement with the date on it.
okay.
I don't have it with me.
It would be sometime around when we voted to do
Yeah.
that, but what
Right.
year was that?
I'm sure it's in the minutes as well.
Okay, just curious. So, the email from Sally provided, so the first sort of place to look to would be I think that section 4 in, part 3, general conditions. All schedules, tables, and formulas developed and utilized by the company while doing the revaluation shall remain in the town in the TRIO software system, which can be utilized for future reassessments by the town. So I guess one thing I was wondering, is that where is it in the TRIO system at this point, in compliance with
Yes.
the contract? Okay. So that's the first, that's the first kind of deliverable that the contract talks about. There are also some statutory and regulatory provisions as well that Sally looked at and I looked at as well. The first being 36 MRS section 331. That's not really a deliverable, it's just talking about what manual to be used. And the point of, I think, providing that statutory reference is that the statute allows for the use of the state assessment manual or another professionally accepted manual or procedure. I know a lot of, maybe Steve can speak to this too, that it's funny, a lot of municipalities we represent right now are going through evaluations or just did. So it's kind of like, you're in the same boat as a lot of others with questions and, complaints about how the reval process went. But I think at least in another municipality, the thought was that the state assessment manual was a bit outdated, and so their revaluation firm used a different, procedure, but it was, that was deemed to be professionally accepted. And so I don't know if Steve, you had questions on that, on the state assessment manual being, I think it dates back to maybe 2012 or something.
The date on the manual is 2012, it is out of date. Certainly any pricing schedule in there is extremely out of date. It's on our radar to update the manual, but it hasn't occurred yet. So I think relying on the state assessment manual in this market, with what was recently occurred, would not have been a prudent idea.
Because I know, just the reason I mentioned it is because in another municipality, there was an abatement request brought on the grounds that that the state assessment manual was not used by, I'm not going to name that revaluation firm, it's a different one than what you used, but and the response from the assessor's agent was, well, we didn't use those pricing schedules because they're out of date, and so I just wanted to point that out to the extent that there were that there may have been some concern that the state assessment manual was not used on the pricing schedules and things.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So, and it should be in the information I sent to you. If you guys don't have it, there's also, I printed out the TRIO, I'll say, guidelines to real estate assessing. And I highlighted, and if you need that for reference, I
sure.
highlighted a piece in there. So I highlighted, you guys have them in your book if you need them. on the 1, 2, 3, 4th bullet says, cost approach method is used, and this is on the Trio manual, which is the software that we use. It says cost approach method used as the proper means to equitably estimate value in a manner which both the assessor and the taxpayer can easily understand. And I'm not quite sure that this manual that we were given from Harper provided, and this is our manual, I don't know if you've seen it or not yet, but that is the actual manual that they gave us, that I'm not quite confident meets the standard that any taxpayer could easily understand, which is required for them to understand that when they file for an abatement with us, they're required to put the value they're requesting back. And I don't believe that this has provided them the tools to make a fair valuation.
Yeah, I mean, I think the cost approach generally is seen as the one that's probably easiest to understand.
I'm more concerned about the second part of that statement than the actual approach. Is the material with which we received for both the assessor and the taxpayer easily understandable?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd have to look at your cards to see. I mean, because
Well,
usually.
this is what they gave us to use.
No, I understand, but the cost approach will be spelled out on the property tax card. So that's the question: is that easily understandable? The way that typically the cost approach will be spelled out on the card for the taxpayer to understand how it was arrived at using the land value, the improvement value, depreciation values, that kind of thing. So that's I think to me that was more the question is that, you know, what they're talking about here is it easily understandable by looking at the card itself, how the cost approach was arrived at.
So,
I mean, this whole manual, this isn't going to be helpful. I mean, most of this is going to be inapplicable to an individual's property. So,
but if they're trying to come in and estimate, and there's, you know, what are the gradients of waterfront, for example, and how is that? How do they quantify what's on their tax card to what is their actual property? And because we, on the application, I made copies of our application as well. We, as part of their complete application process, they have to give us a value. And I don't believe we've provided that, or that information is readily available, without going in and editing the property card in the system to populate out what that valuation would be, which you can't really do until after the abatement's been approved. You shouldn't play with the number, I guess is the best way to put it, to determine what that request should be. So I guess I'm trying to figure out how we help our residents achieve an understandable calculation.
yeah, I mean, is this a question that you posed to Parker Appraisal?
We've put several questions to Parker
But they-
Appraisal, and they don't answer any of them.
And they don't have an explanation for.
This is what they said we have to use as our guidelines. That's
Yeah.
all we've got.
I mean, maybe I can ask Steve. I mean, I'm not an appraiser, I'm not an assessor, so I mean, for me to say, you know, how do you, but all I'm saying is that, you know, I think what this is getting at is that there needs to be a way, whether it's on the card or elsewhere, that a taxpayer can understand how the cost approach was, how that led to the value that's on their card. It's going to use square footages, it's going to use acreages, it's going to use the percent good, that kind of stuff on the, you know, it should be reflected on the card, so that if that wants to be, if the taxpayer wants to challenge it, they can have, you know, good faith, you know, something to look at, and something to point at.
But how do you give them that information in file that good faith has to have?
Well, I mean, it should be, yeah, it should be available, you know, somehow, and again, I'm not an appraiser, so, you know, for me to look through this, you know.
Department as well.
Do you have any questions to follow up at this point? So Steve, what is your reading of this?
Part of the statute that you talked to, and it goes to Rule 208, which we have, which is the guidelines for professional assessing firms. And part of that, upon completion of a revaluation, a firm must present the municipality with documentation that the municipality can use to follow through with implementation of the revaluation to make any future value adjustment. This documentation includes, but is not limited to, a complete set of property record cards, either printed or electronic, detailing the construction for each building for all property within the scope of the revaluation, and all grading and pricing schedules used and documentation of any methods and procedures associated with the revaluation. Part of that is, I think, the description of their methodology. For instance, if you have, and I have not looked at your data, I have not looked at Parker's work, I'm not talking about their work, but if the town is split up into different neighborhoods for valuation purposes, I think that it would be best if they provided you with some description of those neighborhoods so you could go forward with that. So you know the boundaries of the neighborhoods. Why were they set up as neighborhoods? Is there a difference in the quality of waterfront from one neighborhood to another or something? All of those things should be laid out for you in a manual so that you can read it and continue on. And if you don't choose to have Parker as your agent working forward, someone else can come in and follow their methodology and understand it. The book that I was given a copy of this to review earlier, and that is just the pricing schedules from TRIO. There's really no description in there as to how they're applied, what grading schedule was used, what is the difference between a grade A building and a grade B building, or a grade C, or however. There's no description to it that will allow the town to move forward with the product and be able to implement it easily. Unless, and again, all I have seen is that assessment manual. I don't know any other products that you might have received. I'm just saying, if that is what you got, I do not think it is sufficient for you going forward to maintain what you have.
And when you offered that opinion to Suzanne, why was it that you did not make contact with either our town administrator or or Parker Appraisal if you found that the information was inadequate?
I was contacted by her as a select person for the town of West Bath. I assumed that she would act and pass that information on to the board.
I did.
In the middle of a public meeting when we had no forewarning.
I had spoken to him that afternoon. How do I forewarn you?
A call to perhaps Christine might have been considered.
Regardless of the timeline of it, the information that we received was not complete. I may not like the delivery of it.
I don't see how this is helpful. I think we need to move on.
Can't hear you.
I don't think this is helpful. I think we need to move on and discuss our questions and how we move forward.
Do you have a question?
I'm trying to take this all in because my main question is, how do we move forward? What are the next steps for us? How do we make something happen rather than, this is not helpful.
So I
I'm
guess
sorry.
if we
It's not.
look at the town attorney based upon what you've just heard, and I presume you had enough time to look at some of these questions in the presentation.
Yep.
I guess, talk to us. Help us, you know, and you represent our town and we need your guidance to move forward. Because we, based upon what we've seen, don't have the material necessary to support some of these abatement requests.
I would like just one more. Christine, do you know what's in the TRIO stuff beyond, is there anything beyond the red manual?
We do have other information that Parker Appraisal provided to us. At this point in time, I'm not comfortable that I understand what I'm looking at. I'm wondering if it might be helpful, if it's possible to have a representative sent to the town office to perhaps look at what we have. Do you have the staff available to do that?
That would be me,
Okay.
and I would be more than willing to come and look at it.
Tomorrow?
I think that would,
You said you weren't going in the office.
I think that would be really helpful so that at least we're sure of what we have.
Yes.
There's, people are making statements about what we do and do not have that may or may not be accurate. So I think that might be a good starting point.
I think that's a very, very good suggestion. And that's what I was kind of getting at before, is like what is it that they have provided, what have you, requested that they are refusing to provide, that kind of thing, because obviously the first step in if there's a potential dispute under the contract would be to reach out to them and explain to them, what it is. It sounds like you have reached out, but perhaps, having an understanding for what they have provided, and if Steve can provide some insight from looking at it, whether it's, it is, useful, whether it's something that does either comply with the rule that he stated, and also the contract that requires it so that you can utilize the information for future reassessments by the town, would be helpful to know, to understand whether they have lived up to that provision in the contract or not, and whether they've lived up to the rule. I think I would point out the rule, I think, is not something that's enforced by the town. It's a rule that governs assessors by the state level. So obviously those things are things that are required to be provided, but in terms of what your recourse is if they're in violation of a rule of the state. I mean, the contract itself does not sort of say the assessor will or the appraisal firm will meet all requirements in chapter 208 or something like that. It provides for the language that I had talked about before on having information that can be utilized for future reassessments and the schedules, tables, and formulas developed. So that's kind of the question I have: is your TRIO system sort of populated with the schedules, tables, and formulas that they're talking about in the contract? And maybe Steve can help us shed some light on that. As to whether a future, if this isn't going to be your assessor's agent, if a future assessor's agent can take that information and make it, make it usable by the Board of Assessors to do future reassessments.
So while you're talking about a contract, the right in the very beginning and repeatedly used throughout the contract is they reference themselves as appraisers, which implies that they are licensed appraisers, and they are not. And that to me is, it feels like a significant misrepresentation. How do you feel about that? It starts right on the page 1 in Articles of the Agreement. Right up top.
I don't know, so you're saying that they're not licensed appraisers?
They do not have a licensed appraiser. They don't have an appraiser license at the company. Yet throughout the contract, they reference themselves as an appraiser.
They're actually certified main assessors.
But that's my point. They're calling themselves an appraiser.
I just want to make sure Mark understood that.
Yeah, I'm not aware of a requirement that they.
Well, it's just when you present a contract, you go to a doctor, you expect them to be a doctor.
There's no requirement that they be an assessor, appraiser. The requirement is that they have at least one certified main assessor working for the company.
They have to.
Yeah, I mean, typically, if there's something that you were relying upon, it would be listed as a representation and warranty. That they're warranting that they're only,
They're presenting themselves as an appraiser. An appraisal license is significantly more involved than an assessor's designation. Significantly more hours, more schooling, and throughout the contract. And they even say, they're literally several times throughout the contract, I didn't highlight them all, they declare that they're an appraiser, which to me is a further degree within the assessment value of real estate than an appraiser. Not to slight anyone in this room who is an appraiser, I don't mean that in any way, or an assessor.
Yeah, it's interesting that they call the Board of Assessors as the appraisers in chief. And a lot of these terms are not defined. It says the company agrees to supply the services of its appraisers for the appraisal and valuation of all land within the town's limits. I'm not really sure what they're, like Steve said, I don't think the revaluation is required to be provided by an appraisal firm. So I'm not sure that that's a sort of material, breach of the agreement to not, to not provide that? I mean, if maybe it was part of the board's due diligence to look into, their credentials, maybe, was this cover letter the only response to the bid that they provided?
You didn't see this in advance, has your company not seen our contract in advance?
Oh, no, I did. Yeah.
Before we signed it, you saw it?
You mean in preparation for this meeting?
No. Did you?
Oh, I don't,
is my
did
understanding
you send it to Sally? I don't know, I didn't, but did Sally review it, or?
Okay, I think I can help with this. We did an RFP that looked significantly different than the proposal that Parker Appraisal submitted. When we put out the RFP, we did not receive any responses after soliciting responses directly from the people who were listed on Maine Revenue's website. So I approached Parker Appraisal and asked them if they would like to submit a proposal. Sally reviewed the initial bid, the initial RFP.
Did she review the contract before we signed?
I would have to look back and see. I think it was in 21 and I'm not sure. But I can look back and see if she did. So this
I
is
did not, so, but
Yeah.
she may have, I don't know.
This
but I
is
did
a
not.
proposal submitted after the fact.
So was there, I assume that there was a draft or a proposed contract with the RFP that went out, and then nobody responded to that?
Right.
And then they provided, then Parker responded with this contract that they, it's
Correct.
probably their form contract that they
Correct.
completed. Okay.
The town attorney has blessed an expense of $150,000 to make sure the town is protected.
Steve, when can you, at your earliest convenience?
I was going to propose next Friday.
That would be the
That's available.
second.
All right. And I will plan on being I'll try and be here by 9 o'clock.
Okay.
Is that acceptable? Does that meet your,
Oh, I just don't think we keep trying to move forward. How do you move forward when we don't know what we have? I mean, we've got to figure out what we have, what we need, in order to move forward. And I feel like, and I say this at every meeting, we're going around in circles. So I appreciate you making the time and hopefully giving us the answers to move forward.
Well, and I guess time is of the essence for the town. On February 29th, we're done with the abatement process. I shouldn't say done with that. We're done with accepting and processing abatements that can then go to our review board. Now, I know, it's my understanding, and Steve, I'll ask you if this is correct or not in an interpretation, that while we cut our process off on the 29th, up until we go to commitment, we can still process and approve abatements, but they cannot, if they're denied, cannot go before the review process.
If you, the process is within 185 days of commitment, the taxpayer has the right to request an abatement. You have 60 days to respond to that abatement request, or it is deemed denied by the board automatically. If in the course of that 60 days, you need more information either from yourself or from the taxpayer, you can extend that 60-day timeline by agreement with them. So if you run into a situation where abatements are coming up on that 60-day deadline and you don't want to just automatically deny them, you can request from the taxpayer an extension. And if you're both in agreement, then that's fine. If it is deemed denied, then they have the right. Do you have a review board here?
Yes.
Okay, then they have the right to request a review of that denial by the board within 30 days.
right,
But when we hit February 29th, which is our 185th day,
You can
They can't go to the review board,
No, they can.
okay, up until we hit commitment in April.
185 days is the limit for when they can request a abatement.
So
The
anybody.
board itself, within its own action, can act for a year after the date of commitment on abatements, but the taxpayer can only ask for an abatement in that 185 days.
So that people have until the end of February to request, if they haven't made a request for an abatement, there is still time.
Yes,
They can do it every year if they so choose.
right. And
Yeah, that's just
And
for
you
the-
as,
for that
and
tax year.
Board of Assessors, acting on their own, can work further than that 185 days. If you determine that there was an error or an inconsistency or whatever, you have the ability to grant an abatement in that second 6-month period.
Yeah, just like, I'll read the language in case anyone is curious. So the assessors, either upon written application filed within 185 days from commitment, so obviously the application being filed by the taxpayer, stating the grounds for an abatement, or on their own initiative within 1 year from commitment, may make such reasonable abatement as they consider proper to correct any illegality, error, or irregularity in assessment, provided the taxpayer has complied with section 706, providing information to the board if requested. And then there's a separate ability of the municipal officers to grant abatement up to 3 years after the date of commitment. But that's for an illegality, error, or irregularity. So it's like that up to a year, and so it's not an overvaluation issue for the officers, it's more there's an error, irregularity, or illegality.
Right. Once you pass that 1-year time frame, you cannot address a valuation concern unless it was a case of error, a building was put on the lot that wasn't on the lot, that type of thing. That's an
Double
error.
taxation.
Double
So
taxation.
you can go back in time and grant backwards a credit?
Up to 3 years
Up
back.
to 3 years.
Okay.
Yep.
We had a case within my memory of being on the board of a person who was originally assessed for a stick-built house, and it was a modular home. And
That's an error in
And that family
assessment.
was able to have the 3 years.
That's the classification of an error in assessment.
So I
It
guess,
can't be that they have a stick-built house, they feel their stick-built house is overvalued,
Right,
and you adjust the value after that 1 year
right,
period.
it would be for
Right.
a
An
grievous
error.
kind of error.
Right, yes.
so we currently don't employ or a contracted assessor or any assessor housed on site at the town hall currently. And so in our instructions to final abatement, they're requested what is their requested reduction in value for the abatement? And because we don't have someone on site to really tabulate that within TRIO, how do we come up with that value to properly file the abatement request or assist our residents in their pursuit of that value?
Is that information available online? Like,
That's the instructions to file
no, I mean,
abatement.
the
No.
information related to someone's individual assessment, is that available?
Well, so that's
On
our,
request.
that's for Steve as well, that's our instructions for filing abatement. So there's no, because the town directs them to come in and talk to them for assistance in tabulating the value. And I don't think, I'll put myself included with my real estate degree, that I have the capacity to come up with that determination. And I think the only way to do that would actually to go in and change components in TRIO to spit out a value, which to me is fudging the, because you haven't been, the abatement hasn't been approved, so changing the file preempts, a grander mistake perhaps than having someone as an assessor on site to determine that. I don't know how we can go about doing that right now.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you're referring to with changing the numbers.
So right now, our staff, we don't have any assessor. We used to have one that was there a couple days a week.
You mean like assessing agent?
Yes.
Okay, Yeah.
And we're looking at getting a contract person,
Mhm.
that's another opportunity for us, but we currently don't have anyone to assist a resident in the tabulation of the abatement. And right now, the only way to really go in there would be to, alter their current property card to spit out a value, because our staff doesn't have the capacity to determine the value. So how do we guide them into making an abatement?
Well,
There's no way that we don't, because this is based upon what this is, we don't have formulas or the data to help them in
yeah,
that.
again, I'm just not really sure what you mean by guiding and helping them file an abatement. I mean, the town has assessed taxes for April 1, this is for April 1, 2023, right? So, and so you have assessing records for that April 1, 2023 date to, tax cards showing how you arrive at value, the square footages, all that stuff.
So
Right.
there's a lot of errors on the tax cards right now.
Right, and so
And
that's
so-
usually the basis for the abatement.
Right,
It's
so
like,
someone comes in
come in
and
and
says-
says, I want an abatement because this is wrong. I actually don't
Correct.
have that much square footage or
So
whatever.
let's say you've been, you've had a title piece of waterfront, and now you've been assessed as deep water.
Right,
And you, on our form, are required to put in a value. But there's no information available currently in our town to tabulate that fluctuation in value from deep water to title. So how do we assist them in that when the information's not there?
My suggestion would be that we would find out whether or not that information is actually there after Steve takes a look on February 2nd, beginning sometime about 9 o'clock in the morning, that we would know whether or not those things were there and and how to correct them if they need to be corrected. Is that what you are authorized to do?
I can look at your data and give you an opinion as to the sufficiency of it.
Right, you wouldn't be correcting individual tax cards.
No.
You would be telling us whether or not we had sufficient information to back our tax cards.
Yes, and to the point of the abatement process, the key part of this is, it is the taxpayer's responsibility to prove that the record is wrong. Whether or not they come up with a suggested abatement amount doesn't necessarily mean that that's the abatement you could grant. If they, for instance, said, I think, and I am just going to throw out numbers, so please do not hold me to any number that I throw out. That they have the title piece of waterfront and it was miscategorized as deep waterfront. And they say that, and they tell you that they think that's a $50,000 difference in value. If you make the correction and the data that you have that was done during the reval points to a $20,000 difference, then that is the abatement you can grant. You don't have to grant the amount that they have requested or deny that amount. You can offer a different amount than that. And then that is up to them whether or not they wish to appeal further at that point.
Now, would it be the normal responsibility for the town to provide them with information about the new value? Or is that something that the taxpayer themselves would be required? If I wanted an abatement on my house, the chimney is not in as good shape as it ought to be. It's not it wouldn't be for me to go to the town office and say, tell me what the difference is between a good chimney and a bad chimney.
They could request that from you. It's information that if you can provide it from your system,
Okay, so,
it's public information.
okay,
well, another example would be the land schedules, which I think are in this manual. So I think to the point that you were getting at, there's base lots amounts for acres for each of the different land schedules. So there's like, I don't know, 100 land schedules, different land schedules.
yeah.
So it'll tell you what the base acre is, $40,000 an acre, 42, depending on 52, depending on what type of land it is. So if they're looking at their card, their assessing record, and it's incorrect, because they were assessed at the base lot of $76,000 an acre, and they say, well, under these schedules, because I'm in title and not deep water, whatever it is, I should be $40,000 an acre. That's an error, and that's gonna be the basis of my abatement request, is that it was incorrectly done. A separate basis may be, well, I think that the base acre that they've provided is actually too high. You know, so that's a different question. That's more of an overvaluation thing, and not, you know, sort of an error on the way that the sort of the data spit out the value. And that's going to require some more showing, as kind of as Steve said, the burden's on the taxpayer to show that the methodology used by the assessors, you all, was improper, was not correct, and is manifestly wrong. That's the burden that they have to show. So maybe they would need a you know, a realtor's opinion of value, that, you know, the per acre is not, you know, that's not really, you know, matching with what the market is, that kind of thing. Or maybe it's a unjust discrimination. It's, you know, a similarly situated lot, you know, was valued differently than another similarly situated lot, that kind of thing. So there could be different, you know, bases for an abatement request. It's not always just overvaluation.
But
Sometimes
this looks
it's
more like a
discrimination.
cookie cutter approach, and one of the things that we don't have in here, which Steve mentioned, is our neighborhood analysis. And a significant thing that we're also missing, we have not seen yet, would be the comps. And I recently took a terrific assessor's course for an hour and a half, and I actually loved it. But that came into tabulating your average, where you remove the upper and lower 15% in your comps and come into your 70% average. And every person that's come here, we said, you know, well, show me the comps on how you determine my valuation. So what were the neighborhoods, which we don't have, let alone the comps that stipulated that neighborhood, to quantify the value that they were given as their taxes.
Yeah, and again, that's sort of a question of what that information may exist, and it's just, you know, it hasn't been accessed or printed out as part of the thing. I think that's what this fact-finding, gathering process may help to uncover, because I would be, you know, surprised if it may be that information was not printed out and put in the manual, but
You're very hopeful.
I like to be an optimist, but it may prove that information was never considered, and that they only considered the cost approach. They didn't consider comp sales, you know, at all. But
You have to have comp sales. You have to have comp sales. There's no other way around that, because especially based on what has recently happened in the real estate market over the past 3 or 4 years, is
so I'm not arguing that you shouldn't use comp sales. By law, you have to consider it. You have to fully develop at least 2 of the methods of value. You have to consider all 3, and as to whether they're appropriate. But you have to fully develop at least 2. If I'm not mistaken about that, but no, you know.
You have to consider all. There are 3 approaches to value when they do an assessment. There is the income approach, there is the cost approach, and then there's the market approach. And that is the typical one that we see if you're doing a real estate appraisal for your bank loan. That's the one that involves comparable sales. The preponderance of assessment in the state of Maine is done on the cost approach because of the limitations of sales data in the state. So you cannot go out and do an assessment based on sales, because you can't find sales for every house that's in the community. And it would take too long, it's burdensome, it's not. So the methodology is to do the cost approach, and you develop a cost model, and you apply that model to the properties in town. And you test that against known sales. So you take the sales that have occurred after you've applied the cost model to those properties and see, did you hit the mark? Did you hit market value? And that's, so that's the use of sales.
And how does the radical fluctuation of pricing that's taken place in coastal communities in Maine since 2020. How is that figured? So if I brought you an appraisal for my house today, it might be different from my house when the assessor came to visit in the summer of, I think, 21.
One of the first, and we're really getting very far into the weeds on this type of thing. So when we take a sale that we're going to use either to test our model or use it as a comparable sale in a typical appraisal, and I do have my appraiser's license. If you have that sale, what you have to look at is what happened in the market. How long ago did the sale happen, and what is the market doing? So if it's a sale that occurred a year ago and the market has increased by 10% over that year, then you should increase the sale price by that 10% to reflect the current market, not the market a year ago. And it has been a major challenge for anyone who has worked anywhere within the state of Maine, but particularly in southern Maine, because we have seen extreme growth in values, upwards of 30 and 40% in some communities. So that time adjustment is really important in this type of market.
Well,
Excuse me, would it be, if I'm going to ask for an abatement, am I asking about the price today or the price when the assessor came to visit?
It is the value that was set as of the effective date of April 1st.
On this year,
Yes,
or
right.
next
The
year?
date of assessment.
The date of assessment is April 1st of every year.
And my bill was for 23.
Correct.
The next bill will be for 24.
Right.
Okay.
So they, and I'm guessing that, I'm kind of gonna answer this one question. It says development of unit costs, they use Marshall Evaluation Service, is that, so if that is the process with which they use, so is that, if that's their appraisal analysis, what, is that a cost analysis, is that
Marshall and Swift is a company that provides a building cost manual. They do not deal with land cost. So it deals with construction costs of the buildings to be able to come up with what is called replacement cost of the home.
Okay.
And at that point, you take that replacement cost, because that's you consider new, and you have to adjust that cost based on the age and condition of the home to account for depreciation. So the way the cost model is to work in an assessment world is we call it the replacement cost new, less depreciation, plus the site value. And that comes up with the value of the property.
and that you should be able to see or not see in the information when you come and review that, on how they determine that?
Yes.
Yeah, Marshall is
Marshall
widely
Swift.
used.
Yeah, it's nationwide. I used it as an appraiser for 20 years. So,
You have any more questions?
So, well, I guess I have a couple more for the town attorney. I know you don't want to get into the contract stuff. So, when we look at the contract, there are a couple things that I don't think were completed based upon the commitment. So photos taken by the company. Photo on my property card is the same photo from my last property card than this current property card, so that's not a new photo as far as I'm concerned. It also says that they will revisit the house up to 3 times. I travel a lot for my job, and I have 2 different security systems. And on both of those systems, I only saw someone visit my house once, and I was not home for that. They never came back to address my structure again. And that I've heard from a lot of folks in the community, that they did not come back and meet the commitment of the contract. So that was number 2 on the contract, physically inspecting each property. I don't believe that, and it was up to 3 attempts. And some of the other things, and that's also in section 3 on page 2 of the contract. And then we also get into the physical and functional depreciation, which I guess Steve will see how well that's been loaded into our system. But that also is on page 2 of the contract on what depreciation allowances shall be established when functional depreciation applied for obsolescence, design, lack of utility, local disadvantages, and other factors affecting the market value of the property. So I'm pretty confident that that's in our contract, and we just need to see what's been plugged into the software. And so I guess I'm presuming that we're going to have a follow-up meeting. But hypothetically speaking, if we don't have, if he finds on next Friday that our data is not sufficiently loaded in the computer, what's our next step?
Well, I would have said that you wouldn't pay the 10% holdback.
Yeah, that's a start.
I guess that may be too late, but I mean, typically, so the 10% holdback is usually what is used as your sort of leverage for anything that you think did not get completed during the contract term, whatever it was. You know, I mean, some of these things, you know, is the updated photo, does that in some way impact the value? I don't know, you know, but certainly not visiting the property may result in a value that's not
Accurate.
It's not accurate, and may result in abatement and so forth. So that's you know, certainly those are certainly things that you would raise when deciding, you know, have they completed everything such that they're entitled to, you know, to that full payment. I think, you know, if you want to have a follow-up discussion, I would prefer, in terms of what your potential legal remedies are, I would prefer to have that in executive session.
Sure. Well, I'm trying to plan for the future. Wherever we end up, we've got to complete this task for the community. They're all waiting for a decision on their request for abatements.
Yep.
And what we actually have not seen is the stabilized properties. I think a lot of those folks, because they have a year reprieve, are going to come at us next year, and they have the right to do that. I don't mean that come at us, but request that abatement. And so I'm trying to figure out how we address today and how we address tomorrow, and make sure that the town has been protected throughout the entire course of this reval process.
Yeah, and certainly the contract, I mean, the abatement process and that kind of thing is, you know, is not impacted by the contract and what remedies the town may have under the contract. I just, because that's, you know, could be a potential litigation, I'd prefer to have that conversation in your session.
And I'll throw one, and I know we're getting ready to wrap up, I'll throw one question back out to you, Steve. In a hypothetical world, and you find a week from now that data is not there, and we don't have sufficient information to sufficiently respond to these abatement requests, what do you think our next step would be as a community?
I can talk about the sufficiency.
From a financial perspective.
I can talk to you about the sufficiency of the data. I would direct any other questions about remedies and such like that to your town attorney.
But I guess if I don't have a value, then how do I abate it? Or you can't answer that?
No, I
Okay.
can't.
I understand.
I
And I want
cannot
to,
answer that.
I'm trying to figure out what
That falls outside of my purview and what ours was.
So do
Our
we-
responsibility under all of this is to act as a resource for the community, provide guidance. Our role, our oversight role, and our ability to do anything beyond that is rather limited.
So you can tell us whether or not we have what we need,
Yes.
and we would have advice from our attorneys about what would be the next step if we do not have sufficient information.
Yes, because I'd much rather that he had to deal with it than I.
Me too, because he has way more experience with
That's
the law, right?
well, I'm trying to figure out, you know, are we at risk of having to do another reval? I guess that's in the back of my mind. Are we at risk of having to attempt this?
I have no reason to think that. I have not seen the data yet, so I just, I will just look at it and see.
Understood.
And I can make, I will certainly, if what I find is not sufficient, I would certainly be willing to tell you what I think you need to have it be sufficient, and then you can use that going forward.
That would be useful information to have in reaching out to
Right.
the counterparty of the agreement.
Just as a question, would you also then convey that information to the assessing company that did the original work?
I don't think that Maine Revenue would be comfortable doing that because it really is a
Contract.
matter between you and your contractor.
Okay.
Understood.
But I will provide the information to you as the board,
Yes,
and what you do with it after that.
okay.
I am curious, I do have a question. How does a firm get removed from the list that the state has?
If they fail to comply with the requirements of Rule 208, they can be removed from the list.
And does that usually come about through a complaint raised from a municipality, or how does that usually come about?
In all honesty, it
Never
hasn't.
happened.
It doesn't, the current market and climate has changed the way people look at revaluations now than what they did 2 years ago. And the public light shown on the revals is much greater than it was before. So,
Okay. Do you have any further comments?
Is there gonna be an opportunity, once we get the report sheet, maybe to meet again, ask questions if we have any?
absolutely.
Will you be able to tell us on next Friday whether you feel it's, I mean, we could,
I'd rather look at the data
Okay.
and give you a response. I will try to be as timely as I can within what I have to do as a state employee, but I will reply as
Do
quickly as
you
I
mean
can.
to say that there are other towns who demand your attention? Really?
Well, I've got three evening meetings next week, so.
Well, thank you for coming to us.
Oh, no,
As
that's
we-
absolutely.
very much appreciate you attending tonight.
This is what you pay me to do, so.
Probably not enough some days.
I'll leave it there.
No comment.
Comment from you, Christine?
Not at this time, looking forward to next Friday's meeting.
Anything further, Suzanne?
Not yet, no.
Deepest gratitude. Thank you very much. And thank you, townspeople, for your,
It's good to see people in the audience.
for your quiet attendance and consideration for what the parameters of the meeting can set up. Really appreciate that. And so we will adjourn until we meet as the select board on February 1st. I think it's interesting that you're coming to us on groundhog.
No
That's
comment.
That's a
No
horrible
comment.
thought now, isn't
Let's
it?
hope it doesn't happen like.
It's not a state holiday, so I'm not worried about it.
Like it.